Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of my chat with Kersten Lutz. We are chatting all about getting people comfy in front of your camera, whether it's headshots or boudoir, and how do you make people look and feel like they belong in front of your camera. So, as I mentioned in part 1, our intention was 30 minutes. We are not going to do that, so you get a part 2. Enjoy. So, Kersten, how do you actually develop the skills to get someone to look comfortable, which I guess means they feel comfortable in front of the camera?
Yes, and I mean, partially you've already answered your own question there, because if you get your client to feel comfortable, then inevitably they're going to look more comfortable and more relaxed in front of the camera.
Yeah,
it's about first of all, it's about setting up that rapport and building that trust at the beginning. Before you even start before you turn the lights on, before you get the camera out, and before any of that happens. If we get to the point where we already feel like we know each other, then this whole process then is much easier. And I talk about clients through absolutely everything. The first thing is, of course, you build up a conversation that's based around the client. About their interests, what they do for a job. If it's a corporate headshot, of course they need it for their, for their business website or whatever. So it's really easy to find topics of conversation, to start with.
Yeah.
Topics of conversation that are relevant to that particular client. If it's an actor, it's super easy. I mean, oh, you're an actor. Oh, great. What kind of auditions do you go to? Like, what movie have you been in, or what TV show have you been in, blah, blah. And once you're on the topic of TV shows, I mean, it's so easy then to go like, oh, have you seen, I don't know, whatever TV show is happening at the moment, and before you know it, you might be talking about Stranger Things and about some other, it's so easy really to just get, into a conversation. And that's really it. It's just really getting the client involved in a conversation and taking their mind off of what's happening around them. That's the important part.
Yep.
Because that's where all the nervousness comes from. It's just, your mind gets locked into thinking, oh my God, there are lights. Oh my God, there's a camera. Oh my God, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. Once your mind is locked in that loop, then that's trouble, and so you need to get them out of that, and you need to get them to think about something else. And if we're having a laugh, as they say in Britain, and we're having a really good time, then it's easy. Then they forget about all of this. They forget about, the lights and reflectors and lenses and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So that's really, that's really how I approach it. By and large, it's really just getting them enthralled, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good point, is to make them, distract them so they're not thinking about what's happening. That's how I approach my posing. I move fast when we are in shoot mode. It's like I'm going from one pose to the next really quickly, because the poses feel really uncomfortable usually. They feel weird, especially in boudoir with my lighting style. It's just, no one ever does any of the things that I'm asking them to do. And so I want to keep them moving so they don't have time to think about, what sort of weird position I have them situated in. Several years ago, I reached out to a dating coach, Marnie Kinrys. She's out of Southern California. And I think I found her through her podcast. And I had her on my podcast at the time, just talk about, like, how do you quickly build rapport with people? And I think if you're someone sitting at home that's like, this is great, I'd love to be able to have conversations, but I can't have a conversation with somebody. How am I supposed to get them comfortable in front of to have a conversation with me? Dating coaches, I think, are the way to go, because that's literally their job, is to teach you how to be comfortable and get other people comfortable in front of you quickly, because that's what it's like to go out and meet somebody or go on a date. So whether it's an online course or you hire somebody, I think that skill set would be the quickest way to learn how to have a conversation.
Yes, right.
How to Win Friends and Influence People from Dale Carnegie is another one. Who was the other one? Was it Churchill? No, Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain. Also very, very well known for being the kind of person who walks into a room and makes everyone else feel like they're the most special person in the room, despite the fact they were talking to the prime minister at the time. So I think those would be great resources. I mean, shoot, you can even just jump on YouTube, I'm sure, and do how do I start conversations, and just keep it that simple. And just like we're reminding our clients constantly that it's not a big deal to be where we are. There's no reason to stress out or be nervous about what's happening. It's important for us to be in the same boat. Just like, you know what? Anything that I mess up, I'm going to be able to fix. My client's probably not even going to know. So...
And this, you're absolutely right. It's about making the client feel special. A really easy thing that I do when it comes to corporate headshots, for example, especially especially when I do volume headshot sessions where I shoot a larger number of people, like a team, for example, or something, and I don't have that much time with each one. But a really easy trick, especially when let's say you're shooting a male client, is to just strike a really simple conversation. Like when you get them ready, and you get them to pose and whatever. What I do very often is I adjust things like a tie or the lapel or whatever else. And you can just compliment them on their choice of jacket or something. It's like, oh, that's a really great jacket. Where did you find that? It's amazing. And immediately they feel flattered. And once you feel flattered, then you start to feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And then that's a really simple way of starting a conversation that's not about what you do, i.e. the photography, but it's about them. And that's the trick. It's really just, focusing the conversation on the other person. Incidentally, that's also something I learned from dating.
Yep, absolutely. And when we're taking photos, I am giving my clients compliments the whole way through. And in a boudoir space, especially as a male, I'm never using the word sexy or hot or anything like that. It's still professional, stunning, gorgeous. You look incredible. You're totally crushing it. You're nailing that. Lots of high fives. And there are so many shots I do where I don't like them, but I'm going to tell my client they just absolutely crushed it and give them a high five. Because I want to keep that momentum going. They don't need to know that that new pose I just tried was a stupid idea. Or I totally didn't nail that thing. Or I caught them with like one eye open. No, they look great. High five. Keep rolling. And I can just eliminate that photo when I call later. But as far as they're concerned, we have 7,000 amazing photos. And they're the best person I've ever photographed.
Wouldn't it be funny? Do you remember that movie where, was it with Ricky Gervais, where he couldn't lie? Or something like that.
Liar, Liar, right? With Jim Carrey?
Or something like that, yeah, where he can't tell a lie. Wouldn't that be funny if...
yeah, and he was a lawyer. That was the
that's right.
joke of the movie. Yeah, I know. But there is humility, too. There's some times where I'm like, do you want to try something new? I've never done this pose before, but I think it might work. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And I'll put them in the pose and it's not working. I'm like, that made way more sense in my head. I guess bodies don't move like that, or... not all my ideas are good ones. You still look great though. And just, I will take accountability for that. And I'll, kind of make a joke out of it. Then we quickly move on to something else. But there's been so much buildup at that point that, we can just laugh about it and move on to the next thing. And then I'll take another shot, show them the back of the camera. And they're like, damn, I do look good. Cool. Let's keep going.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I start with the standard kind of setups. At the beginning of the session, just to make somebody feel comfortable. Although I probably know most of the time that they're probably not going to be interested in that particular setup. Like, white background's a good example. I mean, it's a standard headshot type of a thing. White blown out background. It's a super easy type of headshot. It's very, it's a very flexible type of thing. You can do it on LinkedIn or whatever, company websites. Awesome. But it's also extremely boring.
It's like a stock photo.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's usually how I start, just to warm them up and just to get them used to the whole idea. And that's also the opportunity that I take to teach the client the whole idea of posing. So once I'm done with that, I talk them through the whole thing. I pose my clients from the feet upwards, basically, although it's a headshot. So I get them to stand and to move and to turn and shift their weight and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And, by the time we're doing the second setup, they have learned how to do it already at that point. And then it basically means then, there's, you can create that flow. And although, of course, they're not professional models or anything, they already know what to do, and I don't really have to say that much. And that kind of means, we can carry on with the conversation. We can talk about other things.
Yep.
And so sometimes when, I might take a few shots, and then, we have a little bit of a conversation, and I take some more shots, because I tether to Lightroom, much to my despair, and it's sometimes it takes a while for the image to actually make its way through the cable into the computer.
Yep.
It might take a few seconds, and it's a great opportunity also to just take a breather, or just carry on with the conversation, or there's always something interesting that you can find about your client, whether it has to do with their job, or what they're using the images for, or before you know it, you might be talking about the last holiday they have, or kids. I live with Scooby-Doo. I share my house with Scooby-Doo, basically. My dog is nuts. And that's often a really easy conversation point.
Yep.
Because they might have dogs, or they might ask me about the dog or whatever, because he really is nuts. He's not in the same room. Yeah, I mean, he's
the guest appearance in the last one we did.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. He breaks in sometimes. That does happen.
Yep.
But, he makes himself heard.
Yeah.
When people come in, so it's always the first thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people are dog people, and then immediately you have a plethora of topics to talk about.
Absolutely.
It's really,
or
it's easy.
People are just in a better mood around a dog. Like, you can't not be, I feel,
Yeah, exactly. And, like I said, I mean, it is literally like living with Scooby-Doo. He's just the goofiest dog I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so he's funny, It's like, I think even people who are maybe a little bit standoffish when it comes to dogs, or don't have a connection with dogs, but they see him, it makes them chuckle, because he's literally that stupid.
What are some of the lines that you use? Do you use lines when you're with people to like get different emotions or expressions, or if you see them getting tense, that you can, like, a pattern interrupt? Do you have that?
Yeah, so one of the things I do is I use a posing technique called a turtleneck, which is really rather, to somebody who doesn't understand anything about portrait photography as such, it seems awkward and weird. It's the idea that the closer an object is to the camera, the bigger or the larger it will appear in the frame. And when we're talking about headshots, clearly the largest thing we want to have in the frame is the face. So if I can get the client to move their head or their face closer to the camera, then I can balance out certain things. I mean, first of all, I can sort of balance out the neck, but also if somebody's a little bit larger, I can make them appear, just a little bit smaller, basically, if I move the head closer to the camera.
Right.
So what I get them to do is to do the turtleneck, which is essentially just sticking out your head. It's a really weird, awkward way to stand. Nobody ever stands like that.
No.
But then, of course, it looks good in the photograph, since we're compressing a three-dimensional world into 2 dimensions effectively. And, that's always something that kind of, gets them back into it, and it's funny, and it's slightly weird. But then when they see the result coming through on the screen, they understand what I'm talking about, and then, of course, it's not a problem. So, yeah, it's, sometimes I use things like, I don't really use lines.
Okay.
Per se, just mainly because, I don't know. Well, so I tell you what, I tried this many years ago. I had a career obviously as a musician, as I mentioned earlier, and I used to do a lot of solo acoustic guitar gigs, which is basically just me on stage playing acoustic guitar music.
Sure.
But I would use different tunings for every song, so I would have to retune my guitar in between every song, and which also meant there'd be like a minute or something of a gap between one piece to the next piece. And so I would have to communicate with the audience, because otherwise they're just watching a dude tuning his guitar.
Right. Which is like the longest 30 seconds of your life.
Exactly. And so, I tried lots of different things. Like, I tried things like, I try to remember lines, and I'm really bad at remembering lines. So
Okay.
that didn't work for me, and I would like literally forget my lines. I'd be like, I can't remember. Then I'd try jokes, and of course I'd be nervous because I'd be on stage, and so I'd start with a punchline, and that didn't work out either. And so, eventually, and I kept breaking my brain trying to think of different topics to talk about and whatever, until I got to the point where I thought, okay, do you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about things that are actually happening to me in my life, and I'm going to pick out one person in the crowd, and instead of just looking at this massive crowd and being, getting nervous about that, I just pick out one person, and I'm just going to pretend I'm having a conversation with that one person, but from the audience's point of view, it'll look like I'm talking to the entire audience. Does that make sense? But in my head, I'm just talking to that one person.
Sure.
And so, at the time, it's really quite easy because I had a baby at the time. So my daughter was like 6 months or something, or a year. And there was always some goofy happening. And so it was quite easy to just, talk about that but it was just easy to break into a conversation in my head with that one person.
Yeah.
Or you can actually talk about the audience. It's there's always a heckler, so you always get heckled. So there's always something you can throw back. But I think I've gotten used to not necessarily remembering lines because I just simply know that I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, that's great to know your strengths and play with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really it's important to know your weaknesses. Yep. And when at the beginning of this conversation, do you remember when we said it's important to really take a good hard look at yourself and think about what kind of person you are, because that might determine what type of photography you might want to get into. I think there's nothing worse if you're not a people person. There's nothing worse than having to shoot people.
Yeah,
it's just just like shooting products. I can't imagine anything worse than shooting products for myself because I just bore myself to hell and back.
Yep.
Doing that,
Yeah.
So I think that's ultimately, that's probably a really good piece of advice. It's not that you can't learn how to make conversation, but I think if it comes to you naturally and it comes easily, then that's a great advantage.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Totally. I think it's great, and I have similar approach, but I do have lines that I use, and I test them like a stand-up comedian does.
Oh, great.
Most stand-up comedians, if you see them on, some big special, they've already gone through and done 100 shows in small clubs with a notebook, and they get up and tell jokes. And if the joke lands well, people laugh, check mark. And if it falls flat, they put an X by it or scratch out or whatever, or work on the delivery again. They polish their routines. It's not the first time they've ever told that joke, even though it looks like it's totally natural, and they just happen to come up with that reaction right there. So it makes it tough in group settings because I can't use the same lines on multiple people if they've already heard me say it to somebody else, So that's a thing. But generally in the boudoir world, we're only photographing one person at a time anyway. But I've got, a handful of things that I'll say to get people to change their reaction. So, when they want to make like the sexy face, everyone looks angry, and I'll be like, and I'll say that. I'll be like, you look fantastic, but now less angry. And then they always laugh, and then I get the laughing shot. Or just little things like that. And at the end of it, I always remind people like, hey, just so you know, you never looked angry. You never looked like you hate me. Like, I was just saying that to get you to change your facial expression. Because I had someone once be like, I love the photos. This was super fun. I just wish I didn't look so angry the whole time. I'm like, shoot, you didn't actually look angry. I'm sorry. That was so convincing when I said it. I was just doing it so that you would change your facial expression. So
it'd be really interesting because there may very well be some like cultural differences between the UK and North America. And I often find that because I have family in Canada.
Yeah.
So often find that there are some very subtle differences in the way that people perceive certain things like jokes and whatever else. And in particular, like, over here in the UK, there's a very specific type of humor, and sometimes it's difficult for me to hit that, you know, because I'm not from the UK, you know.
Right.
So it's like, you know, it's yeah, that's a very interesting thing. And you know, one can argue as to like my kids who obviously, you know, grew up over here, you know, any type of joke I always try to, you know, whenever I try to make a joke, basically, I always get the, oh, it's such a dad joke. I'm like, no, it's actually, I thought it was a really good line.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just, you know, humor here is very different.
Right.
It takes a while to get used to that. I think, you know, interestingly enough, though, you know, what people tend to warm up to, though, is just general friendliness. Because one of the cultural differences between the UK and North America, for instance, is like a very simple situation. Let's say you come into a shop, right, like a store.
Yep.
Like, there is no customer service here to speak of. Customer service hasn't been invented yet over here in the UK. Like, you know, if you ask somebody, like some store assistant or something, you know, anything, like where you can, like, you know, let's say you can't find something and you go like, oh, where can I find, you know, do you know where the, I don't know, pizzas are,
Sure.
or whatever. It'd be like, you know, usually 9 times out of 10, you just get a look, and it's like, you know, the look of death. It's like, how dare you speak to me whilst I am clearly doing this important work of stacking shelves.
Right.
You know, then you go, oh, whoa, I'm sorry. No, sorry I ever asked. But, you know, I think what I've really realized is that, especially when people are, you know, nervous or slightly apprehensive for something, it's just, you know, reaching out and, you know, being super friendly does actually work. I mean, it just, you know, it just makes people feel comfortable.
Yeah. So, Kersten, this was a fantastic chat. We got into some higher level stuff about how to build rapport, how to get people comfy in front of our camera, and we got into the nitty gritty, which I'm glad we did that too, and not just, you know, you should do the thing, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. So I appreciate that you had some good insight and great tips on that as well. You also have a show, which is how we met. I contacted you through your own show, which I love. How can people find you?
Just check out, well, just search for Camera Shake Podcast. It's pretty easy to find wherever, you know, awesome podcasts live. Apple, Spotify, I forget, Google, and all of the other podcast places. And of course, we're also on YouTube. So yeah, if you're interested in the ramblings of a photographer, then, you know, check out the Camera Shake Podcast. Otherwise, you could just, you know, check out my website, which is kerstenlutz.com.
Yeah, I'll have
And
all
if
that
you
linked down below in the notes.